a sign that you're doing right by your body. Teeth look like this after you've had a wonderful, delicious smoothie. I added some of the bee pollen I got from the farmer's market on the island, and I also added a little bit of probiotic powder that I got from Hardy Nutritionals that I was taking on its own, and I stopped taking it for a while, and now I'm going to use it up. But let me go brush my teeth. This is disgusting. Much better. Of course, I used my salt toothpaste, my favorite thing, one of my favorite things. And this morning, I'm off to a good start. I did a few minutes of neck traction. I got it from a chiropractor. And then a little bit of it's also called a spoonk, though I don't think this is the spoonk brand. So just sort of wakes up my skin, and I'm sure there's lots of benefits as well. Improving circulation, things like that. I jumped on my trampoline, I had my smoothie, I'm drinking yerba mate, and I got some new yerba mate in the mail because I went to the place I usually get it and they didn't have any. So I had to revert to online, and often it's easier for me to just buy things online. And another thing I bought online today that I was going back and forth around buying, but then I found it for about $25 US with shipping, is a heart rate monitor ear clip. And I use this chest strap heart rate monitor for doing my coherence breathing, and I did about 10 minutes of that today on the hardest setting. I was on hard and now I'm on extremely hard or something. Ooh, that sounds dirty. But my line of thinking is that it's something I could add to my magical backpack to show people some of these physiological hacks as I'm going about my day as part of the design of moving about in these ways and sharing them. So it's a lot easier to show someone with an ear clip versus having to put something right under their pecs or boobs and wet this part. So I wouldn't really want to wet this and put it on somebody else's skin if I don't have to. And sometimes I just wet it with my spit a little bit because it doesn't take much at all to do that. So that was my line of thinking there. And I could wait till I'm officially starting a business and then use it that way, but whatever. I just like to do things when I do things. And when I was on the island, I had my most calm session of meditation with the Muse headband. And I finally passed level 9, which is needing to meditate around the same time for 3 days in a row. And it was interesting because I got 75% calm. And it was the most calm ever, yet that was the night that I accidentally killed the bee. So during that 15-minute session, my mind was actually energetically a little bit disturbed. I was still with that energy of mourning the loss of the bee. Yet I was 75% calm. So I'm wondering what this is all about, especially because when I got home last night, I did another 15-minute session to get the 3 days in a row. And I felt that I was more calm than when I got the 75% calm. And I was thinking about the bee. Not really thinking, but still disturbed because it had just happened. And so I was surprised when I saw that I got 56% calm. and my brain was more in the active state. I had more recoveries from the active state, and I was thinking, well, what's that all about? And the thing that I like about this Muse headband is creating some of my own meanings and discoveries from it about my brain and my being, not only using it the way they're saying focus on your breath. And I wasn't focusing on my breath when I was pondering the bee. I wasn't at all. Yet it showed that I was in this really, really calm space. And I would attribute that partially to being so connected with nature, spending those 2 hours with a little being and caring for it and being so connected had a profound effect on my brain that even though I was really disturbed after, it showed that my brain was quite calm. And also I feel that the brain can be pondering something that's sad and disturbing. But if it's something meaningful to be sad about, perhaps the brain is still in a calm state. So if I was maybe ruminating on work or a certain person that I have a conflict with, I'm just making that up, then the brain would likely be active. But it felt like my brain was active, but it was active in pondering this deep connection with nature and what had happened. And so it was calm. What I'm trying to say, it was in deep resonance and activity. Even though it was in a calm space, it wasn't showing it was active, though my brain was quite active. It was calmly active about something really deep and meaningful to me. And this is where I wonder about their algorithm for what they're trying to calculate, because I wasn't focusing on my breathing at all. My mind was kind of all over the place about the bee, but it showed it was very calm. I was not focused on my breath and my body and me. I was considering this bee, and being with the bee, and how I had been with the bee for 2 hours, and then it didn't have a good ending, but my brain was still calm because it was something so meaningful. And so that translated into the sitting quietly. So to me, it shows me that spending that time in nature has a profound calming effect on the brain, even if something kind of sad happens as a result. The connection is what matters, the intent to connect, the spending the time and the attention. Doesn't have to be that much time. Somebody doesn't have to spend 2 hours with one bee, but being in nature has that profound calming effect, is what I'm seeing, because like I said, my mind was active and I wasn't focusing on the breath like the coaching of the Muse app would say to do. And I have talked to them on the phone and they said you can focus on other things too, but what I'm trying to point to is that it matters what we focus on. So generally our active mind is chattering on about this self, this me, and its problems and its conflicts and what to do and what should I do, the shoulds. And all of that is an abstraction. It's not actual. It's a disconnection from the actual. So when they say focus on one's breath, it's connecting with something actual, which is the breathing. But I wasn't focusing on this one point of my breath going in and out. I was focusing on, not even focusing, allowing my mind to drift around the meanings of what had happened in that space and time of communion with nature. And I had the highest calm score I'd ever had. So it's one thing to have a busy life and then sit down and focus on breathing and then try to force the brain to be calm by focusing on breathing, or one can spend some time in nature and then put the headband on and see what kind of effect that has. And then one doesn't have to contrive this focusing on the breath as if that's something we can do during our daily life. We can't. We can do that in daily life to bring ourselves back to a calm space, but it's a trick to get us to be able to move in the ways of life that are unnatural to us. So by going and spending some time in something so natural, something so ancient and a part of us, and we're a part of it as nature, is calming. So I like that the headband allows me to see some of these possible relationships between how that time in nature had a profound effect on calming my brain. And to me, that's more important than, can I focus on my breath for 10 to 15 to 20 minutes? When that's not really practical in life. And it's actually wonderful that we can breathe without needing to focus on it. So practicing focusing on those things that we naturally don't need to focus on is silly in a way. It can be helpful, but what it's trying to point to is bringing our attention, not necessarily focusing. Focusing on breathing is silly, but bringing our attention to something that's actual, which is our breath, but we don't need to focus on it in order for it to work. And the same would go for bringing our attention to nature. We don't have to focus on nature in order for nature to work, but by giving our attention, paying with our attention to nature, something actual, something right there in front of us, the brain understands that. The brain doesn't really understand all this abstract blah blah conflict confusion going on in our brain. If it did, it would figure something out of it and it maybe would stop, but that's another story. So then what did I discover from feeling subjectively more calm, less stuff going on in my mind when I was sitting the next day, being back home, and only getting a 50% or 56% calm score. And I was a bit surprised. And I feel like it could have been my whole being noticing that I had traveled a distance and the disconnection from that really beautiful place I was in, and being back in a small room with a bunch of stuff everywhere, because all my stuff that I have with me is in one small room. So the brain was naturally less calm, because the brain isn't separate from its environment, it's perceiving everything. So it's pointing to that nature is healing, makes the brain calm. So we could breathe and focus on our breath until our face turns blue. But if we have totally unnatural environments, it's going to make it a lot more challenging. So not everyone can spend an hour or two in nature, or half an hour, but can we design life so at least some of it is? A lot of times when I edit my videos or do work, I'm walking through a park. So it looks kind of like, oh, this person's in a park and they're on their phone, but it's better for the body to do work in a park than do the same work sitting in a cube. So I'm just thinking of this now. It's sort of like harm reduction to the work that we're doing. We have to do certain work, but can we do it in a better environment? Can we do it in a park, in nature? I sometimes wonder why they don't have covered, semi-heated outdoor areas in parks with Wi-Fi and with plugs so people can sit and work there. Every single park that I've seen, when there's an outdoor area that's kind of covered, and here it gets too cold to work, there would need to be some kind of heat a little bit, but we're okay heating outdoor patios where we can sit and pig out on food that's really bad for us, but we can't heat a little park space where we might be able to do some work there. But there's never any plugs for whatever reason. It's like, don't come here to work. This is for a little bit of time on the weekend if you're lucky. And it was a bit harder for me to get into breathing coherence, but I did eventually get into breathing coherence, and then I was thinking of something, so I wrote it down. And it seems like once I get into coherence, I don't really have to follow the little breath thing exactly. That's interesting. It seems like the body understands. That one has the intention of putting it into coherence of heartbeat and breathing, and then it knows how to do it. It creates the coherence without having the perfect breath rate. And I think that's part of what is training the body to do, because one isn't always going to be hooked up to the app. So I was thinking about this course I'm going to create a little bit, well, a lot, but the thing that came to mind this morning was that there's certain tools that really do help the physiology. And one is the micronutrients, of course. Things like yerba mate instead of coffee, this complete coherence app, the Muse headband. So one could move towards gathering some tools that help us create good physiology. We need to create that. It's not a passive thing that happens. If I eat McDonald's all day long, we know what happens. There's that movie, Super Size Me. So our gestures, our movements, what we put in our body is what we create as ourself. So we need to create our physiology, and there's certain gestures and tools and things we can do to create that physiology, because I had this sense that when we do those gestures, and it doesn't have to be that much in the end of it all, the physiology responds and creates optimal physiology. And I was feeling like if we don't have optimal physiology, then we start to have suboptimal psychology, because in the example of micronutrients, if I'm able to stay well on micronutrients, it shows that all these psychological problems and psychosis and problems with thought and everything like that goes away if I have more optimal physiology, such as nutrients. So what I'm saying is the nutrients are required to stop this epiphenomenon of thought from ruling our life. Thought as the self, which is a rumination of our problems and moving in that field. So we can create physiology that will lessen this epiphenomenon of the self and perhaps increase the epiphenomenon of joy, perception, so many things. And the spoonk is something that changes physiology, and a rebounder and smoothies. And yes, all these things cost money, but it might actually be able to be calculated, the change in trajectory benefits. What necessary preconditions are we creating? If we create optimal physiology, then it could really change the long-term life that we live. And I was also thinking about the word why, and it relates to what I've been talking about with living one's dreams. If we don't design that and start to live that concurrently at the same time, if we're starting to get our physiology in order, if we don't get our manifest life in order and create that order in our life concurrently, then what are we creating the optimal physiology for? Because that's going to want to be mirrored in the actual happenings of our life. And I was thinking about how I've said bipolar in order for what, and also Simon Sinek says find your why. And this morning it arose in my mind that that is not quite a correct statement. I feel it's more correct to say create your why. Because if we say find, that creates more seeking. And our main trouble is that we're seeking for something away from the moment. So by looking to find my why, I'm looking somewhere for it. It's not here right now. But if we create our why, then all of a sudden we're in the moment creating it. We're accessing our creative power, which is the power that we've lost because we're so busy seeking, looking, trying to find.
Trying to find makes us blind.
So saying find your why encourages more seeking. It's saying it's something out there to find. We have to create it. We have to create our why. And by creating optimal physiology, we're creating optimal physiology in alignment with life so we can live life. The why is in living life. And part of living life is creating the life that we're living and living that which we're creating. It's joyful to move into something that we've designed for ourselves to move through.
Moving through the mental health system is moving through a system, a life that we have not designed for ourselves. And one of the reasons why we're moving through that is that we're not designing and living the life of our design.
And that led me to realize in a way when I've been wondering about this whole harvest, practice, and body that I've been talking about this whole time. Practicing goes to creating. So it's harvest, create, embody. I've also said harvest, perception, gesture, embody. So creating is perceiving and gesturing towards that. So it's harvest, create, embody, and which is harvest, perception, gesture, and body. But in order to harvest something, we have to perceive it as well. So fundamentally, it's seeing something and creating it. And I want to talk about the micronutrient studies that I read. They're pretty profound, and maybe I'll go into more studies because people love science. My main experiment is my living, experiencing, but it's cool to have the science to back it up. I've already moved into that reality of being on micronutrients and not medications, but reading some of the science will help reinforce what I've done by creating more context around the science of it, which adds to the web of context and it helps to make sense of everything. And something else I thought of was that when I launched this business or whatever the heck it is, and I had some really fun ideas around that, it'd be fun to have a launch party. And then the launch party is also a coming off party. Coming out about coming off meds, because I've only told one person back home. And so when I get to that 9-month mark, it'd be cool to launch the business, which would be an online course summarizing some of this, because I will likely share this 200 plus hours, but it'd be cool to break it down and make it digestible for people. At least that's what I'm feeling I want to do at this moment. I'm not sure. And then design that trip, and also it's a launch party, and another word for launch is takeoff. So then part of the launch is taking off, which is going on a trip that I'll design as a fun and learning trip, and maybe taking people with me or meeting people along the way. I'm not sure how it'll look. So I'm going to keep on creating like I've been doing and play around with the magical backpack idea and different things like that. And all this is a different scaffolding. It's a different physiological scaffolding, is a different life scaffolding. So as we optimize our physiology, which is our material scaffolding, we also need to optimize our unfolding of life and how we move through life and live it. And I was thinking about the 80-20 rule of how I probably use 80% of my voice to talk to myself in creative ways, and then this is creating the movement of my life as well. And I was thinking about how there's probably a certain percentage of energy that we need to devote into designing and living our dreams. So it's okay if I have a little job here, a little job there, or conversations that are at the level of the memories and me in the past, but also designing in these other ways of being and communicating. And the main way I've done that is communicating this way with myself for a little bit of time each day, and it varies. But that keeps me grounded in that way of communicating. So then the fact that most of the world doesn't communicate in that way is okay. But perhaps people will change the way they do. So this is a different scaffolding for me, a different communication. And right now I communicate mainly with myself in this way. So we need to devote some energy as either time or energy, because sometimes it doesn't matter about the time. We can have a burst of energy for 5 minutes that's more powerful than 5 hours. So if we have that burst and we harvest it, we create with it, we share something with it, that is creating the scaffolding of living in that different way, which is living according to that energy and what it directs, which is creative. So living creatively. So if we can spend some time harvesting and creating and embodying, or some energy that moves us to create something each day, then we're creating this scaffolding of living creatively and living in different ways that to an outside observer might seem non-functional. Me talking to myself for hours a day might seem non-functional, but I see the function that it provides for me. So it doesn't matter what other people think. It doesn't matter if people who live in a certain functionality called functional see certain things as non-functional. They may have a different function that we have to create. For example, spending 2 hours in nature seems to have a certain function on the brain of calmness. And that translates into daily life. So we might say, well, what's the point of nature? But we can show with a Muse headband or something that it has a function. And we can go to yoga class and we can breathe and we can do all this contrived stuff, or we can just go be with something actual like nature. And it's up to us to design what we want to participate with. So can we gesture ourselves back into our peak self from our peak map consciousness experience?